So my short talk today, what I'm talking about is incident management. Why do you need a plan? Well, before we talk about that, let's go back to the beginning. Incidents versus crises. Is there a difference? Well, actually, there is. The International Standard on Crisis Management, which is 22361, that says that an incident is an event or situation that could lead to disruption, an emergency, or a crisis. That's fair enough. And a crisis is an abnormal or extraordinary situation which threatens the organization, essentially. It requires a timely response because the organization has got to preserve its viability. Okay, so we've got two different things. So let's look at these in a bit more detail. Yesterday, we ran some exercises nearby for visitors, and it illustrates that in an incident, you've got injured people and they require assistance. Now, if that had been a real life event, for example, and if it hadn't been handled so well, let's say there'd been a delay in getting the emergency services, then the organisation would have come under criticism, and quite rightly so. Criticism isn't good, but if the criticism then leads to a loss of reputation, or insurance claims, or even a prosecution from the regulatory authorities, that is putting the organisation at risk. So that has now become a crisis. So an incident, if it's not managed, can develop into a full-blown crisis that can actually affect the whole organization. So it's got to be managed and contained effectively, efficiently. But you can't just manage something off the top of your head. You need a plan. You can try and make the plan up as you go along, but I wouldn't recommend it. It doesn't work. Martin's Law gives an example of planning. It will require that the companies need an incident plan, a security management plan. But there are many other kinds of incidents that organizations need to consider. And each of these is likely to need its own response plan. So you have to think about these things. The challenge seems enormous, doesn't it? How many different things can go wrong? How can we plan for everything? It's impossible. Well, actually, no, it's not. Because the procedure is quite straightforward. You use the same approach as you do for ordinary health and safety risk assessments. And it works. So you start off by asking, what does the organization actually do? Not what it's meant to do, what does it actually do? And how does it do it? What are the processes involved? Then you ask, well, what could go wrong with these processes? And you always think of the worst case scenario. If something does go wrong, what is the worst thing that can happen? Then, knowing that you've got the base information, you ask the question, what can you do to prevent, and that's the best solution, to prevent the incident happening? Or if you can't actually prevent it, can you minimize the effect? Now, once you've got all this information together, you're in a position to start writing your security plan, your incident management plan. One mistake that can be made, very tempting, is to disregard very unlikely events on the basis they're unlikely. Let's not worry about it. Not a good idea. And I'll give you an example of how even the most unlikely things can happen and put the company in a crisis. We're going back to 1991 to a chap called Gerald Ratner. He was CEO of a family jewelry business started by his father, high street jewelers, very, very successful. Something like 2,500 shops in Europe, the UK, and America, and doing very well. Now, in the April of 1991, Gerald Ratner was asked to give a keynote presentation to the Institute directors at a dinner. And he did. And for some reason, he decided to crack a joke. It turned out to be a very, very expensive joke. He commented that they made so much money and were so successful because basically they sold rubbish. And he's the CEO. That was bad enough. But then he doubled down on it by making a comment which has gone down in history, that we sell the jewelry just cheaper than a prawn sandwich. Earrings cheaper than a Marks and Spencer's prawn sandwich. And the killer of the question, or the joke was, actually, the prawn sandwich will last longer than the earrings. Ho, ho. Yeah, that went down like a lead balloon. People did not like to think they'd been treated as idiots by the company, so they just walked away. They wouldn't buy anything. The investors ran for cover. They could see the trouble happening. Believe it or not, the value of that company on the stock exchange crashed by £500 million. That was a very expensive joke. It was so bad the company nearly went bust. It had to restructure financially, close a number of shops, and Gerald Ratner became the ex-CEO. Now, you can't plan for the CEO going rogue, but what you can do is have an incident plan, a crisis management plan for a PR disaster. They didn't have one, so they got a problem. Okay, so you've got a plan, you've got an idea what's going to go into it. So what format should it take? What should it look at? Well, you've got to consider things like the activation protocol. Who will initiate the plan and how? What are they going to tell people? Have you got an emergency contact list that's up to date? The people you need to speak to in a hurry? What are your response procedures going to be? What actions do you need to manage this incident on the ground? What communication strategy have you got? And communications is a topic that one of the TPA speakers, Alice, will talk about later on. In fact, she's on after me. And at the end of the incident, when it's all over, when the dust has settled, crucially, you need to have a debrief. What happened? What went wrong? What went right? It's not a blame exercise. What you're trying to do is to refine the process. Now, the plan may look flawless on paper, but there's not a guarantee it's going to work. And you need to know it's going to work before the incident kicks off. And it's not a new challenge. Believe it or not, 1871, there was a chap called Field Marshal von Moltke. He was a Prussian field marshal, and he wrote a strategy paper for the Prussian military in which he made a comment which is roughly translated as, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. What he meant was, it doesn't matter how good your plan looks, if you're dealing with a complicated situation in real life, then you can almost guarantee that either A, something won't work, or B, something unexpected happens. So your plan has got to be flexible. Testing and evaluation is crucial, and another one of our speakers, Jodie Reed, will talk about this later on. I think she's the last speaker in the group. So, just to give you the key points on this very short presentation. If an incident is not properly managed and quickly and efficiently, it's going to get out of control. It's going to lead to a crisis which threatens the whole organization. And as Gerald Ratner found, it could be very, very expensive. To manage the incident, you need to have a plan. To draw up a plan, you've got to consider what can go wrong and how, and then adjust for that. Don't ignore the unlikely. because we're dealing with the real world, the unlikely can actually happen. So at least think about it. And remember, theory is fine, but in practice, the real world, things don't always go as you're going to expect them to do. Okay. Very short speech, deliberately. I'm here all day on the Penarth Management stand, so if you want to come and talk to me directly, please do so. I don't charge for a chat, it's all free. But are there any questions at all from the audience? Any burning questions? No? All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. Nobody walked out. That's always a good sign. And in about 20 minutes, the next speaker will come on, and that'll be Alice, who will talk to you about communications. And she's got some very interesting gizmos to talk about. Okay? Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.